So whenever you're ready, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Okay, my name is Steve G. I'm a 8th grade science teacher at Granger Middle School in District 204 in Illinois. Yesterday we had a lesson for the 8th grade science students that discussed the Manhattan Project. It was a kind of a tie into the atomic theory, which we were discussing in science, as well as World War II, which they will be studying in the near future in their history class.
Great. Okay, so the first questions here. We want to understand the decisions you made in planning for this lesson and how it fits into the unit and year. How does this lesson connect to and build on students' prior skills and knowledge? What was taught before this lesson and what will come after it?
Okay. Prior to this lesson, we had spent a good 2 or 3 weeks probably discussing the basics of atomic theory. They started out learning from the Democritus days back in 400 BC and the discovery of the atom to current understanding of how atoms and molecules exist and function. We've done a lot of different diagramming of atoms, and I decided to introduce a literacy component because that is also part of our curriculum to try to tie in reading of informational text and nonfiction text. So I searched for an article that was challenging but yet interesting. I didn't want to just find an article that discussed why the periodic table exists. 8th grade students would probably be bored with that. So I thought, what better way to at least try to engage them than to introduce bombs and explosions. So, the atomic bomb had a somewhat loose tie into atomic theory because it did mention, Einstein had mentioned some of the scientists that we've been dealing with. Niels Bohr, who was a scientist very key in the atomic theory, was also very instrumental in developing the atomic bomb. So there was a connection there. We will be eventually leading into a little bit about nuclear power and nuclear atomic energy. So talking about the atomic bomb will also be beneficial to future planning, and as well as with their history lessons coming up. Even though right now they're only in the Civil War unit, within a few short months they'll go through World War I and blast into World War II. And they'll be able to recall, hopefully, this article and enhance their discussions in history class as well.
Great. Okay, so another thing I forgot to tell you, if you remember, try to incorporate the question that I'm asking into your answer.
Okay.
Second one, but that was really good. Is the text used in this lesson part of a sequence of texts designed to build skills and knowledge? If so, please give an example of other texts that form this sequence.
Well, if the answer is no,
Okay.
just explain why, or what are they typically say? I mean, it's not part of a series. It was just an article I found in our database. So like what have people? Has everybody else responded? Yes, it's part of a series, or not?
Yeah, the English teachers,
Right.
obviously, because
Right.
there is a sequence.
Right.
But
Why
don't you just-
I'll try to answer that
Okay.
one. Repeat it one more time, just so I can
Okay.
remember how to.
So is the text used in this lesson part of a sequence of texts designed to build skills and knowledge?
Okay. The text that I used in this lesson was not part of any series or sequence that I have available to me at this time. With the next generation science standards kind of being a little lagging from Common Core's literacy standards, we have not been provided a book or a kit or a bundle of articles that are perfect links and kind of progress through the curriculum. So I just took some time to search our databases of articles at grade level appropriate material, tried to find one that was at or above their comprehension level to kind of challenge them, and again, search for something that would be hopefully engaging to the students.
Great. Next question, talk about the standards targeted in this lesson. What did you do to make the lesson reflect the full intent of that standard?
The standards, the Common Core standards that I focused on in this lesson dealt with the complexity of the text and trying to ensure that the students were engaged in finding direct evidence from the text that by using questions that were text-based, they couldn't rely upon their background knowledge to ascertain the answer. They actually had to read and find the information. If you recall from the actual lesson, there were times during the discussion that I would ask them questions that would ask them to kind of think and infer and maybe use some of their background knowledge. but the actual questions that they had to write about as their homework assignment and we discussed in class required them to actually find the evidence in the article. It was highly unlikely that any of them would have just known the answer off the top of their head. So that's the big push, is to get them into the text and deciphering the nonfiction. Students have been great at reading fictional text, but really comprehending and knowing how to find answers that are not black and white. If I would ask for a certain date or what's the meaning of a vocabulary word that's bolded, they can find that. But when they actually have to kind of interpret the question and it's not straightforward, it requires them to dive in and really read for understanding.
Which of the core action indicators do you think this lesson best exemplifies, and why?
Now I got to remember what the numbers are. This is the first time I used that tool. So which core action indicator? Okay. The core action indicator that I think was best exemplified in this lesson was probably core action number 1. That dealt with making sure that the students were actually using a text throughout the course of the lesson, that it was at or above grade level, that all students were given the opportunity to engage in the activity.
Okay. Next set of questions. We are interested in how the shifts required by the CCSS are being incorporated into your instructions. Discuss how this lesson illustrates the shifts required by the CCSS.
Okay. The shifts required by Common Core were incorporated in this lesson. Let me repeat your wording of the question one more time.
Discuss how this lesson illustrates the shifts
Okay.
required by the CCSS.
The Common Core standards shifts were incorporated in this lesson primarily with the fully engaged lesson focusing on a piece of text. In my typical science classrooms in the past, we would do some reading. Obviously, we don't ignore reading, but there'd be a lot more hands-on activities, which I still like to do in science. I don't think kids learn science by just reading, but I am making a concerted effort to incorporate more challenging text and having them do some more reading and addressing the literacy concerns that we have as a nation into this lesson. So today's lesson, or yesterday's lesson, was definitely addressing those shifts by requiring the students to spend the entire period actively involved in informational text at a challenging, complex level.
How did you teach the content of this lesson or this text prior to the CCSS?
Prior to the Common Core standards coming out and really bringing to our attention, especially in the non-language arts courses like science and history, I probably would not have spent nearly as much time with an article and really diving into key vocabulary, designing questions that required them to really think and dive into the text. I might have, like most people, written questions that, unbeknownst to me, they probably could have just answered with some good guesses, good educated guesses, and they might have been able to be somewhat successful without even reading the entire or understanding the article. So it really forced me to really think about the lesson, think about the design of the questions to ensure that they were text-dependent questions that students couldn't just fake their way through. In the past, my science class, I don't have a percentage, but it would have been a small percentage of the time that would have been spent doing an activity such as that, because again, I like to have the kids doing science. But I am making a major push this year to incorporate more of that. It's not going to be 50%, but it's going to be, every couple of weeks I'll introduce an article and we'll have an activity that involves, reading and understanding and answering some questions, giving them practice, responding to text-based questions and working with each other. I think it's really important to get them to talk with their peers because, they can bounce ideas off and learn from each other that way as well.
Student engagement is crucial to the work of the CCSS. We want to understand how you ensured that all students had the opportunity to productively engage in the work of the lesson. How did you support all students in working with grade level text? For example, how did you provide scaffolding for students below grade level so they can read grade level text?
that's the big challenge. Now the class, I'm just thinking out loud, the class that you guys observed really did not, it was a pretty mainstream class. There were no special education students. There were really no learning challenges in that one. Let's see. So do you want me to focus specifically on that class, or can I talk about?
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Others?
Let's just focus on the kids that were in the lessons.
Okay.
So again, how did you support all students in working with grade level text?
Okay. How I supported all the students in my class with working with this text, and it was supposed to be grade level or above, so the text that I actually found and used when I looked at all the scoring, whether it was Lexile score or Flesch Kincaid, came out to be 9th, 10th, potential 11th grade, depending on the scoring range. So it was definitely a high school text. As I know that would be challenging for a lot of the students, the approach I took for this go around was to actually read it out loud to them, have them follow along. I asked them to use highlighters and make notes. I put some purposes for reading up on the board before we got into the article to kind of get their thinking on three major themes: the secrecy of the Manhattan Project, the location of why Manhattan was selected, as well as the speed at which the project was trying to be developed. So I gave them those kind of purposes for reading before I started reading the article, and encouraged them to make little marginal notes. And I think that helped, because I think a lot of times students struggle with, whether it's a history textbook or a science textbook, if they don't really have a purpose, they don't know why they're reading, then they can get lost in some of the big words, and next thing you know, you're vacationing and going to Jamaica in your mind, and you lose your train of thought, and it's hard to keep that focus. So that was one of my big goals. And then with the activity that I did, by kind of pausing every third or half a page and discussing either key vocabulary in it to make sure they understood some of the more complex words, or asking them some questions that would lead into the bigger idea questions to get them talking. I had them do a think, pair, share activity where they had to think a couple of minutes about the questions I asked, then pair up with a partner and share their ideas, and then they could report back to the group. So that's a good way of getting everybody involved. When you typically just ask students to raise their hand, you get your same 3 or 4 outgoing students that would love to share their ideas. By using the approach that I did, I could call upon students that were somewhat quiet and say, share an idea that you had or you heard one of your neighbors have. So they can, if they're not confident in their answer, in their minds, they can blame it on, well, that's what I heard my neighbors say. So I think that strategy helps with the engagement as well.
How do you know that students were able to successfully respond to the text-dependent questions and tasks with precision?
I was able to determine that students were able to respond to the text-dependent questions with some pretty good precision based on, at least yesterday, based on the feedback we were getting during class. And because I was reading it out loud, pausing, asking the questions, and getting them to think, pair, share, and respond, the responses I got were on par with what I would have expected. I think there might have been a question or two throughout the day that sometimes kids struggled with, and with some leading questions and some kind of redirecting them, they were able to be successful. The real truth will be, their homework assignment, they had to read the last paragraph and actually go back and write written responses, very similar to what we did orally in class. So when I get those papers today and look through them, that will be another indicator as whether the activity was successful or not.
Did the students acquire the literary skills addressed in the lesson? What did you do for the students who did not acquire the literary skills addressed for the lesson?
That's going to be hard to answer because I won't know until I grade this.
Okay. Will you send me a couple
of student examples?
I'll leave you.
Do you want me to kind of do like a high, medium, low type example, or?
That would be good. Even if it's just 2.
Okay, a couple examples just to consider. Okay.
Okay, and then I'll put that with all of the notes you sent us.
Okay.
Which behaviors from Core Action 3 did the students best exemplify in this lesson? What actions have you taken as a teacher to make that happen?
You don't happen to have that sheet?
Core Action 3 is?
Yeah. If not, I'll go. It's right in my email.
Okay. Will you cut it for a second?
Sorry, buddy.
Are you alone? Yeah. Okay. So what behaviors from Core Action 3 did the students best exemplify in this lesson, and what actions have you taken as a teacher to make that happen?
I think the behaviors exemplified in Core Action 3 that were most notable in this lesson that I engaged in were those related to the collaboration between the students. When I would pause and have them do their think, pair, share, it required them to talk with a neighbor and share their ideas, bounce their ideas back and forth. That helps the students that are either struggling, they can, maybe their classmate will give them a prompt and the idea, the aha moment might then come to them. And it also just gets them talking and hearing others' opinions helps in their understanding.
Last two questions.
Okay.
Great instructors are continuously learning. We want to understand what you celebrated in this lesson and what you would improve upon. Reflecting on the lesson, what worked particularly well and what might you do differently?
As I reflect back on the lesson and try to think about, all right, what did I like? What was I excited about? What do I want to do differently? I think the biggest thing that I took away from yesterday's lesson was having appreciation of how long it might take to get through what I think is a relatively short article. It was a 2-page article with lots of pictures, so I mean the amount of text was not long, but I actually didn't even get through what I had intended to do. And the think about this. The activity that I did, I repeated 5 times during the day because I have 5 science classes, and surprisingly, each class pretty much got to about the same point in time. So it wasn't like one class was more advanced and sped through it, or I had more questions. So I think learning to, I believe that this will provide me the opportunity to take future texts and maybe do a dry read out loud, incorporate more time for questioning and vocabulary building, because I actually had a little technology activity planned for the end of it where students were going to be able to get out their devices and respond to some questions and get some instantaneous feedback, which is something they always enjoy doing, and we didn't get to that yesterday. We'll be doing that kicking off today's lesson. So just I think the improvement would be a little bit better time management on reading the article, not being a language arts teacher, being used to doing read-alouds and understanding how long it takes to get through text. That was kind of new to me as a science teacher.
Were there any surprises or unexpected student behaviors or reactions?
As far as student behaviors and reactions went with this activity, I don't know if there were any really unexpected or strange or unusual behaviors. I think what I was glad to see was, in general, how many students at least were interested in the article and were kind of shocked at some of the things. When they discovered that the vice president had no clue this was going on, they're like, wow, how could that be? When they started trying to put themselves in the shoes of Truman and having to make the decision on whether I push the button and give the thumbs up to drop the bomb, the level of engagement, the level of interest was pleasantly surprising, because that's the biggest challenge, especially with 8th grade students, is finding that nonfiction that they don't just sit there and read like this, trying to get them engaged. So I was pleasantly surprised by their reactions and therefore lack of bad behavior. I didn't have too much blurting out or off-task behavior because students tended to be pretty engaged in the activity.
I agree. That's it. You're
Cool.
done.
That's a wrap.
Yeah, thank you.